On Banana Island, Lagos, stood a white mansion, so tall and radiant, it looked like a palace. Behind its black iron gates, fountains splashed, flowers bloomed, and guards stood watch. To outsiders, it was the picture of success. To insiders, it was a fortress of loneliness. Veronica Umeh, the mistress of this house, lived her life like a queen in exile. She was tall and graceful, with smooth, dark skin and sharp cheekbones that gave her face an unshakable authority. Every outfit she wore was stitched by famous designers. Every jewel on her neck whispered of wealth. Yet behind the glimmer, there was no warmth. Her husband, Chief Dyke Umeh, had died 3 years earlier. Their union, celebrated by society as one of glamour and strength, had left her childless. She had cried in silence through years of failed treatments, carrying the burden of shame even though Dyke always reassured her that they were in it together. His death only deepened the emptiness. Now Veronica's life was measured in board meetings, business trips, and lonely nights in a mansion filled with echoes. She sat alone at her marble dining table, ate meals cooked by staff she hardly spoke to, and slept in a king-sized bed that felt like a desert. The city knew her as cold, heartless even, a woman who cared for no one but herself. Yet the truth was simpler. She had cared too much once and been left with nothing. On a Thursday afternoon, the sky darkened with thick clouds. Thunder rumbled over Lagos as rain began to pour, turning Ozumba Mbadiwe Road into chaos. Veronica sat in the back of her black Range Rover, scrolling through her phone, while her driver, Ikenna, fought the traffic. "Madam, should we take the Lekki shortcut? This jam might hold us till night," he asked. She didn't answer immediately. The board had just shifted her meeting for the 3rd time. Her sigh was heavy as she responded, "No. Go through Ozumba. I don't care if it takes 2 hours." The wipers swept furiously against the storm. Street vendors ran for cover. Students dashed under shop canopies, and bus drivers honked endlessly. Veronica watched without much interest, until something unusual caught her eye. There on the road divider stood a boy no older than 13. His thin frame was soaked to the bone, his feet bare, his arms clutching 2 tiny babies wrapped in nylon sheets. The babies cried weakly, their tiny faces streaked with rain. Veronica sat forward, her eyes narrowing. Something about them struck her chest like a knife. She whispered to herself, "Those eyes." Through the blur of rain, one of the babies lifted her face. Hazel eyes, a rare golden brown color. The same color she had once gazed into when she fell in love with her husband, Chief Dyke. Her breath hitched. She blinked again, and the second baby looked up, eyes just as hazel. Veronica froze. Ikenna frowned at her silence. "Madam, should I move? They're just playing begging tricks, Ma. Some even rent babies." "Stop the car," Veronica said suddenly. "Eh, madam? Stop the car, Ikenna. Now." The driver obeyed, pulling to the side as Veronica pushed open the door. Rain poured over her designer gown. Her heels sank into the mud, but she didn't care. Something had just shaken her world, and she wasn't about to let it pass. She walked straight toward the boy in the storm. And in that moment, the life of Veronica Umeh, the cold queen of Banana Island, was about to change forever. The rain pounded like drums on the highway, drowning every other sound. Yet Veronica heard the babies' cries clearly. They were not loud cries, but faint, hoarse whimpers, the kind that spoke of hunger and exhaustion. The boy holding them looked terrified when she approached. His shirt clung to his thin body, his lips trembled, and his bare feet were sunk in the muddy divider. Still he clutched the babies, as though the whole world wanted to steal them away. "Who are you?" Veronica demanded, her voice sharp, though her eyes betrayed her unease. The boy swallowed hard, blinking against the rain. I'm Toby. Veronica's gaze fell on the twins again. Their skin was pale from the cold, their breaths shallow. She crouched slightly, her soaked gown sticking to her legs. They're yours? Yes, Toby said quickly, tightening his grip. They're mine. Her eyebrows arched. Your sisters? He hesitated. No, my daughters. Veronica froze. Your daughters? She repeated, her tone laced with disbelief. You're barely 13. I'm 13, he corrected stubbornly, raising his chin. And yes, I'm their father. For a moment, Veronica stared at him, her mind racing. Lies. She could feel it. Yet when she looked at the way his arms trembled from the weight, not from letting go, when she saw how his body curved instinctively around them, like a shield, something inside her softened. The babies whimpered again, their hazel eyes opening briefly before closing in weakness. Veronica's heart twisted. It was impossible, yet undeniable. Those were Dyke's eyes. Behind her, Ikenna hurried up with an umbrella, his face etched with worry. Madam, you'll catch cold. Let's go. These streets are full of tricks. Veronica didn't turn. She only said firmly, Bring them into the car. Ikenna froze. Madam? Do as I say. Her tone cut through the storm. Toby stepped back instantly, clutching the babies tighter. Please don't take them. I don't want to go to police. Veronica raised her hand gently, her voice softening. No police, I promise. You're coming with us. His wide, frightened eyes searched hers, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he believed her. Slowly, he followed her steps toward the Range Rover. Inside the warmth of the car, Veronica's scarf and shawl were wrapped around the twins. They quieted, their breathing steadying under the soft fabric. Toby sat stiffly at the edge of the seat, water dripping from his hair onto the leather, his eyes darting around as if this was a world he was never meant to enter. Veronica barely noticed him. Her gaze was locked on the tiny faces resting in her lap, their hazel eyes closed now, their fragile chests rising and falling. The storm outside roared on, but inside the car, her world had grown silent. This was not chance. This was not coincidence. Something, destiny, fate, or perhaps justice, had placed these children in her path. As the Range Rover rolled through the flooded streets toward her mansion, Veronica Umeh, the woman who thought her story had ended in loneliness, realized something terrifying and undeniable. Her life was no longer her own. The Range Rover's tires hissed against the wet driveway as the gates of Veronica's Banana Island mansion swung open. Toby's mouth parted in awe. He had never seen such a place, not even in his wildest dreams. Towering palm trees lined the entrance. A fountain sparkled under the rain, and the mansion itself stood like a castle glowing against the storm. You live here? He whispered, almost to himself. Veronica didn't answer. Her eyes remained on the sleeping twins, wrapped snugly in her scarf. She stepped out first, heels clicking against the wet tiles, refusing the umbrella her staff rushed forward with. Don't touch them, she ordered, when a worker stretched out eager hands toward the babies. Toby followed cautiously, his bare feet leaving muddy prints on the polished floor. He hesitated at the doorway, glancing at his filthy clothes, until Veronica handed him a towel. Wipe your feet, she instructed. The boy obeyed instantly, as though she were a headmistress and he a guilty pupil. Inside, the warmth and fragrance of lemon polish greeted them. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and golden frames glimmered on the walls. Toby froze, too nervous to sit or even breathe too loudly. Everything screamed of wealth, and of a life he didn't belong to. Doctor, Veronica called sharply. Within minutes, Dr. Martins Okafor arrived with his black bag. Middle-aged, calm, and meticulous, he bent over the twins, checking their breathing, their foreheads, their pulse. "They're weak," he said gravely. "Very weak, cold and hungry. But there's no chest congestion yet. They'll need warmth, fluids, and proper milk." Toby's head dropped in shame. "I try to feed them, Ma," he muttered. "Sometimes pap, sometimes soaked bread, but most days I don't get anything." Veronica studied him closely. His eyes darted nervously, but his arms reached instinctively when one of the twins whimpered. He knew them, knew which one was Chinaza and which one was Chizoba. He wasn't lying about caring for them, at least. Later, the twins were laid in a clean crib, covered with soft blankets. Toby, bathed and dressed in one of the gardener's son's old clothes, devoured a plate of rice and stew as if food might vanish. But Veronica could not rest. She stood at her bedroom window that night, staring at the rain. The twins' hazel eyes haunted her. They were too rare, too specific. Chief Dyke's eyes. Her hands trembled as she pulled out an old photo album. There he was, her late husband, smiling, handsome, his hazel eyes shining. The same eyes now staring at her from the faces of strangers' children. "Could it be?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Her heart tightened. Betrayal clawed at her chest. But she needed proof, not imagination. Picking up her phone, she dialed Dr. Okafor. "Doctor," she said coldly, "I need a DNA test. Use Dyke's samples from his autopsy. Compare them to the baby's. Start tomorrow." There was silence on the other end. Then, "Yes, madam." Veronica ended the call and stood in the dark, her heart racing. If the truth was what she feared, then her world was about to collapse a second time. Morning crept into the mansion with a gray sky and the scent of wet earth after the storm. The house was unusually quiet, as though it too waited for something to be revealed. Veronica sat alone at the long dining table. A plate of toast and eggs sat before her, untouched. Her fingers tapped against the polished wood, her phone lying face down beside her. She was not thinking of board meetings, nor of business trips. Her mind was consumed by the twins' faces, their hazel eyes that had pierced her soul like knives. Footsteps broke the silence. Toby entered, cradling Chinaza and Chizoba in his arms. He looked small in the oversized shirt the staff had given him, his bare feet soundless against the tiles. The twins were quiet, their faces finely rested, one sucking her thumb, the other leaning against his shoulder. "Good morning, Ma," Toby said softly. Veronica nodded. "Sit." He lowered babies onto a folded blanket by his chair and began to eat slowly when encouraged. Unlike the night before, he no longer devoured his food in fear. He broke the bread gently, chewed carefully, and even paused to feed the twins a few drops of water. "You know their names well," Veronica said suddenly, watching him. "Yes, Ma. That's Chinaza," he said, pointing gently. "And that's Chizoba." Her eyes lingered on him. "You're too young to be their father." He froze, his lips pressed tightly. "Tell me the truth," she demanded, her tone firm. After a long silence, his voice broke. "They're my sisters, not my daughters." Her chest tightened. She had expected it, but hearing it still made her heart pound. "Why did you lie?" Toby's eyes lowered, his hands shaking. "People don't help if you say you're just a brother. But if you say you're the father, they listen." For a moment, Veronica wanted to scold him, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she exhaled slowly. "I don't like lies. Do you understand?" "Yes, Ma," he whispered, shame written across his face. By noon, Dr. Okafor arrived with a small black case. Veronica led him to the guest room where the twins slept. He wore gloves, took gentle swabs from the inside of their cheeks, and placed them into labeled containers. How long will it take? Veronica asked, her arms crossed. 2 days, maybe less. Her heart hammered. 2 days until her life was either shattered or strangely healed. Do it, she said firmly. As he packed his instruments, the twins stirred in their crib, blinking up at the ceiling. Their hazel eyes glistened in the light filtering through the curtains. Veronica's breath caught in her throat. She knelt beside them, her trembling fingers brushing the edge of the crib. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Why do you look like him?" That evening, unable to fight the weight on her chest, Veronica walked into her late husband's locked study for the first time in 3 years. Dust greeted her, and the stale scent of a room untouched. His books lined the shelves, his suit still hung neatly in the closet, his pens still scattered on the desk. It was as though Dyke had never left. She opened the drawers one by one until her hand stilled over a small wooden box. Inside were letters, intimate, handwritten letters, not from her, from another woman. Her heart pounded as she unfolded the first. "Dyke, thank you for coming last weekend. Toby was so happy. I know your life has complicated it, but I don't expect much. Just come when you can. Love, Odessa." Veronica's knees weakened. Letter after letter spoke of quiet love, of a woman who lived in shadows, raising a child who asked for a father he could barely have. One line burned her the most. "Tell your wife the truth, Dyke. It is time." Tears filled her eyes, but none fell. She closed the box with shaking hands, her chest heavy with betrayal. For years she had carried the shame of childlessness, believing it was their burden to share. But now she knew. Dyke had been a father all along, just not to her children. Night fell heavy on Banana Island, but Veronica Umeh did not sleep. She sat in the darkness of her grand bedroom, the wooden box of Odessa's letters resting on her lap. Each word she had read was etched into her heart like fire. Every sentence revealed a life her husband had lived in secret, every line exposing the betrayal she had been too blind to see. "Tell your wife the truth, Dyke. It is time." The words echoed in her mind, tormenting her. He had never told her. He had allowed her to weep through years of failed treatments, to sit in hospital waiting rooms feeling broken, to accept childlessness as her fate. And all along he was fathering another child, Toby. Her body shook, not with tears, but with rage too deep to cry out. Betrayal this sharp was worse than widowhood. At least death was honest. Lies lived on. At dawn, Veronica descended the staircase, her face pale but composed. In the living room, Toby lay curled up on a couch near the twins' crib, his thin arms folded protectively even in sleep. The babies cooed softly, their hazel eyes wide awake, staring at the ceiling as though searching for meaning in the world above them. Veronica's steps slowed. For a moment she simply stood there watching. Their soft laughter, tiny bubbling sounds, echoed across the hall. She hadn't heard such innocence in her house in years, perhaps ever. Something in her chest shifted, a crack forming in the wall she had built around her heart. Later that afternoon, Dr. Okafor returned with the results. Veronica sat in her office, the envelope before her. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. DNA match confirmed. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. The letters blurred before her eyes. She pushed back her chair and stumbled to her feet, pressing her palms to her head. "They're his. They're really his," she whispered, her voice breaking into the silence. The room spun. For a long moment she simply stood there, caught between anger and grief. Then slowly she sank into a chair, the envelope slipping from her fingers. That night, as the house grew quiet, Veronica sat with Toby on the couch. The twins slept peacefully nearby, their tiny chests rising and falling. Neither of them spoke for a while, the silence heavy but not hostile. Finally, Veronica turned to him. "Toby," she said softly, "did you ever meet your father?" Toby hesitated, then nodded. "He used to come sometimes, with presents. He never stayed long. Mummy said he had another life, but he came when he could." Veronica's throat tightened. "Did he tell you his name?" "Yes." Toby's eyes flickered with innocence. "He said he was Mr. Dyke." Her chest felt like it might collapse. With trembling fingers, Toby pulled a folded photo from a small plastic bag. It was old, edges frayed. In it, Chief Dyke stood tall beside a smiling woman, Odessua, with little Toby between them. Veronica's hand trembled as she held the picture. The truth was undeniable now, not just science, but proof in ink and memory. She stood and walked to the window, the Lagos night glittering beyond the glass. Her mansion glowed, her wealth surrounded her, yet she had never felt so small, so betrayed, so human. Her husband had left her with riches, but in the shadows he had also left her with children who bore his eyes, and whether she liked it or not, fate had delivered them to her doorstep. Sleep abandoned Veronica that night. She lay on her bed with eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, her body motionless but her mind racing like a storm that would not end. The DNA results were final. The photo Toby gave her was undeniable. The twins with their golden brown eyes were not coincidences. They were blood. They were Chief Dyke's children. Her chest ached. She had mourned him as a faithful husband. She had defended his name against rumors. She had built her life around his memory, her heart hardened because of the emptiness he left behind. Yet here, staring at her now in cribs, and in the gaze of a boy who barely knew what childhood was proof of his betrayal. She had believed she was barren. She had carried the weight of infertility alone, through IVF sessions, failed treatments, and silent nights of shame. He had told her it didn't matter, that they were a team, that they would travel and grow old together without children. And all that time, he already had children. When dawn touched the mansion, Veronica sat at the dining table, her face pale, her posture stiff. She had made her decision. She needed answers beyond science and paper. She needed to know who Odessua had been, what life her husband had hidden. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked up her phone and dialed a familiar number. "Mr. Falarin," she said, her voice steady but low. "I need everything about a woman named Odessua Umeh. She lived in Nsukka. She was a teacher. She had a son named Toby and died during childbirth 2 years ago. Find everything. Where she lived, who she was, what people knew of her." The investigator's voice was calm. "Understood, madam. You'll hear from me before the day ends." When she ended the call, Veronica leaned back, exhaling heavily. The twins cooed softly from their crib nearby, their eyes wide and innocent. Toby sat on the rug, gently shaking a scarf-turned toy for them. Their laughter, real, sweet, unhindered, filled the hall. Veronica froze at the sound. It was such a simple thing, but it struck her heart. Her mansion, usually so quiet and cold, now held the sound of baby's joy. For a fleeting second, it felt like life. She turned away quickly, refusing to let her heart soften. "Don't get attached," she whispered to herself. But deep inside, the walls around her heart were already cracking. By afternoon, Mr. Falarin called back. His report was clear and swift. Her full name was Odessua Umeh, a teacher at St. Luke's Primary School in Nsukka. Quiet, respected, never married. Lived in a one-room apartment behind the school. She only had one visitor from time to time, a man with a big car. She died giving birth to twins in a small clinic. Complicated delivery. Passed the same night. Veronica's voice broke slightly. And the boy? Toby? Stayed with a neighbor for a while. Refused the orphanage. Said he would take care of his sisters himself. Veronica closed her eyes, her throat tight. She imagined a 12-year-old boy cradling newborn babies under a leaking roof, fighting the world alone. "Did she ever try to contact me?" Veronica asked, her voice trembling. "No record of that, madam, but one of her letters said clearly, 'Tell your wife the truth, Dyke. It is time.'" Veronica's grip on the phone tightened. Betrayal never felt so sharp. Not only had Dyke lied to her, he had ignored the plea of a dying woman to tell the truth. She ended the call and sat still, her body heavy with grief. Yet as she looked across the hall at Toby rocking his sisters to sleep, something inside her shifted again. These were not just reminders of betrayal. They were children, innocent, fragile children, whose only crime was to be born into lies. And whether she liked it or not, destiny had brought them to her. The sun was low over Banana Island when Veronica ended the call with Mr. Falarin. She sat motionless, the silence in the room deafening. Her husband's betrayal was no longer suspicion or rumor. It was history carved into letters, DNA, and the faces of innocent children. For a long while she remained still, her manicured fingers pressed tightly together. Then slowly she stood, straightening her gown as if to armor herself. She needed to see for herself the world Odessua had lived in, the life her husband had hidden. But Mr. Falarin had already done what he did best. Before evening, he arrived at the mansion with a brown folder in hand. "Everything you asked for, madam," he said quietly. Inside were photographs, a modest one-room apartment in Suka, a chalkboard-lined classroom at St. Luke's Primary School, a group of teachers smiling with a woman whose face was simple but kind. Odessua. She was not glamorous, not wealthy, not even trying to be. Yet in her eyes was dignity, the quiet strength of a woman who gave all she had for her children. Veronica's breath caught. She had expected a temptress, a woman who stole her husband's heart. Instead, she saw someone different, someone who had lived honestly, simply, without greed. Someone who, even in her letters, never asked for money or power, only for truth. "She died in childbirth," Falarin said softly. "The clinic report is here. She never made it past midnight. The baby survived only because a nurse stayed behind." Veronica's chest tightened. She imagined it. A weak woman, alone in pain, bringing 2 lives into the world with no husband by her side. And then gone, leaving a boy barely 12 to carry the weight of fatherhood. Her throat burned. "Did she ever ask him for me?" she whispered. Falarin nodded. "Yes. One of her letters begged him, 'Tell your wife the truth. It is time.' She wanted you to know." Veronica dismissed him with a faint nod, unable to speak further. When the door closed, she sank into her chair, her hands trembling. That evening, she stepped into the garden where Toby sat, rocking one of the twins while the other gnawed happily on a plastic toy. He looked up when she approached, his young eyes filled with caution but also trust. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. He scrambled to his feet. "Yes, Ma." She gestured for him to sit beside her on the bench. For a moment, she simply studied him. His thin arms, his awkward posture, the way he watched the babies as though he was both brother and parent. "I found out more about your mother today," she said slowly. His eyes widened. "Really?" "She was a good woman," Veronica continued, her voice trembling. "Quiet, honest. She didn't chase money. She taught children, cared for you, and she loved you. She did her best, Toby. And she wanted the truth to come out, even if it hurt." Toby's head dropped. He rubbed his hands nervously. She used to tell me we had a big family somewhere. I didn't understand. She said one day the truth would find us. Veronica's eyes glistened, though no tears fell. It has. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of the twins babbling softly. Then Toby looked up at her, his voice small but steady. "You're, my stepmom." Veronica froze, the words striking her heart like an arrow. For years she had been only a wife, then a widow. Now fate had laid a new title before her. She inhaled sharply, then nodded once. "Yes," she whispered. "I suppose I am." For the first time in years, Veronica Umeh's cold, guarded heart began to thaw. The days that followed were heavy with silence and thought. Veronica moved through her mansion like a woman haunted, her face calm but her heart storming. Every corner reminded her of Dyke. The study he once worked in, the dining table where they once sat, the bedroom that now felt like a grave of broken vows. Yet now the silence of her home was interrupted by the soft cries of babies at dawn, by Toby's quiet voice as he sang lullabies he had taught himself, by the sound of tiny laughter echoing through golden hallways that had never known such joy. At first, Veronica tried to resist. She reminded herself that they were not hers, that they were the product of betrayal. But the walls she had built around her heart cracked wider each day. One evening she stood at the doorway of the guest room watching. Toby lay on the rug, reading from a worn storybook. Chinaza gurgled happily in his lap while Chizoba tugged at his shirt with a toothless grin. The sight pierced Veronica's chest. For years she had prayed for children to fill her home. Now here they were, not born of her, but placed in her arms by fate. Her steps carried her inside before she realized it. She sat on the edge of the crib, her eyes falling on the twins' hazel gaze. Slowly, almost trembling, she reached out her hand. One tiny fist wrapped around her finger, and in that fragile grip, something inside her broke. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Why do you have his eyes? Why do you carry the truth he never told me?" Toby looked at her carefully, then spoke in the soft tone of a boy far older than his years. "Mummy used to say, children are never the mistake. It's the choices of grown-ups that make the pain." Veronica turned her face away, tears finally sliding down her cheeks. She had thought her heart was stone, incapable of breaking anymore. Yet here was a boy teaching her what her wealth and status never could. Forgiveness was not for the betrayer, but for the betrayed. That night she gathered the twins into her arms. For the first time she rocked them herself, humming a lullaby she barely remembered from childhood. The babies stilled, their tiny breaths sinking with the rhythm of her chest. In the quiet, Veronica whispered to herself, "I could choose bitterness, or I could choose to heal." The decision was not sudden, nor was it simple, but as dawn broke the next morning, a change had already taken root. Veronica Umeh, once called the Cold Queen of Banana Island, walked down to breakfast not alone, but with Toby and the twins by her side. The mansion felt alive in a way it had never been. The echoes of loneliness were replaced by the sound of children. And though betrayal still stung, though scars would remain, Veronica realized that life had offered her a chance at redemption. For the first time in years, she smiled. Not for society, not for wealth, but for the fragile family fate had placed in her care. The children with hazel eyes had broken her, but they were also teaching her to live again.